from the 17th century, and it's kind of good just for a point of reference as we think about the different time periods. We're going to start today in the Google Classroom, which I don't do very often, but sometimes there are important pieces of information that I need to get out to you. I will sometimes put it also on the Blackboard, but the STC people don't really want us to use Blackboard for any announcements other than STC type announcements. So I'll just be using both of them. I think most people have their notifications on for Google Classroom. In any case, I went ahead in the classwork section. I want you to note that I have added to the scholarship tools. We were talking about scholarships a few weeks back, and I added a whole bunch of tools here to help you. Seniors, you should be working on scholarships right now so that you can have money for college, not just for paying for college, but for all of the other incidentals that you might need. But yesterday, the community scholarships, or sometimes what they call the local scholarships, opened up through the WISD portal, and I wanted to let you know that those are available starting today. So the counselors went ahead and, well, it's a district initiative to put all of the community scholarships up on one site so that you can do your application one time and apply to multiple community scholarships. Community scholarships are important because they give the money directly to you. So once you show that you have enrolled in your courses, you can take that paperwork to whatever organization. It could be a school, it could be, like a community organization. There are lots of different ones. Then you take your paperwork to them and they will cut you a check. You can put it in your bank account. Most other scholarships don't work that way. Most other scholarships will put the money into your school account, and you don't ever really see the money itself. They just put it right into your school account and it gets subtracted from your balance that you have with your university. Local scholarships are organizations who realize that as incoming freshmen to college, that you might need to buy things and have a bank account. Like you might need a laptop, you might need books, you might need to relocate. And so they offer these scholarships in varying amounts, and they can really help you out as you move on to the next stage of your life. They don't really offer those types of scholarships later on when you're older. They're mainly just for freshmen. So if you go to the classwork tab here in Google Classroom, you'll see under scholarship tools that I put a link here. The counselors made a video about how to fill out the application for the local scholarships. It opens today and you access it through your portal. So if you're having trouble with your portal, I know I've had a number of students that told me that they couldn't access their portal. You can just let me know. It's been working 100%, that as soon as I reset the password, people are able to get in there. So I can do that for you if you're struggling with that. Just drop me an email or something. But anyway, you're going to want to watch this video, seniors. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long, and they will walk you through that process of filling out the community scholarship application. And I put it right here under scholarship tools on the classwork page, because the classwork page is the only page where it gives me these different options. So another opportunity that I wanted to tell the senior girls about is that one of my former students, Juanita Maldonado, she is she graduated probably in 2014, 2015, something like that. She's already graduated from UTRGV with a journalism degree, and she runs a nonprofit, and she does a lot of journalism for local stations and things like that too. But she is offering an opportunity for graduating seniors who might be interested in what's called the prom experience. Now, she contacted me and she was telling me about it, and it's her way of trying to give back to the community. She is also a pageant winner. Hold on. She's also a pageant winner. I can show you her picture. I put it up for the other class yesterday. She's won many international titles and she does a lot of work in that realm. The reason I mention that is because, oh, there she is. The reason I mention that is because the prom experience is that they're going to give 5 young ladies from the Valley a makeover, like sort of like hair, makeup, photo shoot, and a dress that they get to keep. Because they want, realize that with COVID, not everybody is going to have the ability to have a prom the way that we normally would. So she is having a bit of a contest, and you can click here for the details. She has a nonprofit called Empowering Mindsets. They have a really active Instagram if you were interested in that. But in any case, she wants to help 5 girls to go through, give them this little opportunity. Come on, there. So it's an essay contest. So you have to write about why you think you should be a recipient of the prom experience. And it's open until the end of March. She was telling me that she really hopes that they get some East applicants because they want to, she said from East. So it'd be cool if I could have some applicants also from my school. So that's an opportunity that you might want to be thinking about. Look down and see, are you wearing pajama pants? What are you wearing? Do you have those fuzzy slippers? What's going on? Maybe you want to have a little bit of a makeover session, and that would be a cool thing to look forward to at the end of the school year. And they are going to have a photo session also, so there's photos that are involved. That could be a good way to get some senior photos, like end of your school experience kind of deal. But anyway, that's there in case you are interested in pursuing that. Or if you have questions, you can let me know and I can contact her and ask your questions. Any questions on either one of those things, the senior scholarship, the senior community scholarships, or that Empowering Mindsets? All right, then we might as well head over to Blackboard. On Blackboard, we have the new unit. So I'm going to walk you through that a little bit. This one popped up. I forgot my water over here. Hold on. I think I posted that on Saturday. So I want to walk you through this unit 3. It's set up the same way as all of the other units. There's an introduction. You should read through all of that information. So there's the picture that I put in my behind me. It's, I don't know, they always mirror image it for some reason. Probably could turn that off in the settings. So there's an introduction that you need to read. Here are the objectives for Unit 3. You should be able to explain the characteristics of 17th and 18th century British literature and distinguish it from the writing of other time periods. We will do the 17th century before spring break and the 18th century after spring break. So this unit's kind of split on either side of the spring break and on either side of the midterm too. You should also be able to articulate the changes in the English language during this time period from the previous ones. Explain the ramifications of the Enlightenment on the thinkers and artists of the 17th and 18th centuries. I'm going to be talking about the Enlightenment today. Articulate responses to specific questions about readings. That's your discussions. Demonstrate communication skills. And demonstrate social responsibility by investigating critical perspectives. So all those are the goals for this unit. In this unit, there will be a number of graded assignments. The essay, even though it's from Unit 2, will be turned in during this unit. So you'll want to note that. It's due on the 21st. There are 2 discussions that are associated with this unit, number 5 and number 6. Number 4 is due this week, and I'll talk about that in a second. And also, of course, we have the midterm coming up, which is 20% of the overall semester grade. So all those are happening during the time of this unit. The readings for Unit 3 are kind of limited. I had to take a few things out because of that week that we weren't in school. I kind of streamlined this unit a little bit because of time. But there's some poetry. We're going to look at some poetry today as examples of 17th century writing. We'll also be reading Paradise Lost, just the first 2 books. It's just the very beginning. This course is a sampler, so we just sort of like look at the little beginnings of different pieces for the most part. Same thing with Gulliver's Travels. We're only reading part 1. That's coming up after spring break. Here is the contextual notes part, which is about background on the different key elements of the unit with the terminology that's listed here. So we'll be going through these things as we go through the unit. This is also where you will submit essay 1. So when it comes time that you're ready to turn that in, that essay, even though it's over Othello, the submission is in this unit. So just keep that in mind. Discussion 5 and 6 are associated with this unit. Number 5, which is due the Friday after spring break, is on Paradise Lost, and then the one the following week is on Gulliver's Travels. I did not make a discussion due next week. I could have made the Paradise Lost one due next week because we'll be finished with Paradise Lost on Tuesday, but I figured you would be taking your midterm toward the end of next week. So I wanted to make sure that you didn't have any competing assignments, and I postponed it to the week after. Videos of lecture, this is where you will start to see links to the different, just like all the other units that we've had since the beginning of the term. This is where you will see all of the links to the different class periods where I'm talking about these different elements. So today this one will go up. And then other materials is where, as I talk about maps or I use PowerPoints to go over material, you can find all of those things here in other materials. This is the slideshow I'm going to be using today. So if you wanted to bring that up so that you can look at it on your own, then that's where that one is. Let's go over to the discussions, and you should see that number 5 and I don't know why 6 isn't showing. I'll have to look into why 6 isn't showing. It's not due till April, but let me make a note of that. Sometimes things happen like that. The one for this week, though, is discussion number 4. So let's look at that. Maybe you've already started with it. I think it's best to work on it over the course of time so that you've got some good thoughts before you have to sit there and post on Friday. I see a lot of people post on Friday, and I think that's fine, but you could help yourself out by sort of breaking up the assignment and spending some time thinking about it, doing some drafting, that kind of thing, previously, so that you don't have to sit there for a long period of time on Friday trying to develop an idea. But this week, the topic is on Othello. So the question says, the Renaissance is celebrated as the birth of humanism. Review humanism, and there are the pages in your PDF that you can go back and review if you would like. Also, it's from one of the lectures that I did over the Renaissance when I did that PowerPoint, so it'll be in the previous unit. Then in your post, explain this term and apply this humanist concept to the art of Shakespeare in Othello. In other words, how does the play Othello reflect humanist ideas? Then there's sort of another part. Some argue Shakespeare was one of the first psychologists. So how do you think Othello explores the psychological complexities of motivation? So that one's just asking you, psychology wasn't something that existed in Shakespeare's time. It's like a lens that we could apply to Othello. But what do you think Shakespeare's trying to do in terms of exploring different motivations? I think probably Iago is the natural one to talk about there, but Desdemona has motivations, Othello has motivations, Rodrigo has motivations. So that's stemming into that sort of psychological complexity about identity and motivation. Same length, all of them are the same length, and then your replies are due on Monday. If you finished discussion 3 after last Wednesday, then I will be doing those grades tomorrow. So if you submitted the entire thing. If you went back, lots of people had submitted the post, but I was waiting until everybody was able to finish the replies to go ahead and give the grade. So I'll be grading all the rest of them. All the ones that were done by last Wednesday, I graded, but the ones that came in, I think the deadline was Sunday. Those that came in more recently, I'll have those grades up tomorrow so that you can, start to see how your 5th, 6 weeks is shaping up, and also you can see how that's going towards your overall average at STC. I do recommend that you go back and read the feedback that I put on your previous discussions. Maybe look at that before you do discussion 4. All the time, I'm not trying to be critical. I'm trying to help you to improve so that you can get the best grades possible on the discussions. So there are some people who have been, kind of maybe mediocre. They've been getting 75s, 78s, somewhere in there. And so usually on those, and even the ones that are 80s, 85s, I've been trying to put commentary to help in case you're interested in improving your score. So definitely look at the feedback on the previous discussions before you work on number 4, in case any of that will help you. Are there any questions on discussion number 4? That one's due this week. All right, then I'm ready to go through today's discussion topic, which is 17th century literature. On Thursday, you will need to have read Paradise Lost Book 1, which is about 20 pages. This is called a book, but it's really just a chapter. And on that one, I'm going to, as I talk about 17th century literature, I'll be working in that PowerPoint down to the point where I get you some background and some ideas about where Paradise Lost is starting and get you some help for reading that. But you should have read those 20 pages by the time you come to class on Thursday. So let me go through some of the background information for 17th century English literature. There are about 35 pages in your textbook that go through the 17th century. They call it the early 17th century or the Restoration. And I'm kind of distilling that down. The textbook, I think I've said this before, the textbook does a lot more history than I think is necessary in a literature class. I mean, it's good to know about the history, and history does affect literature, but this is history class. So you don't have to memorize all the monarchs and all of the skirmishes between the different factions of the royalty and all that stuff. I think it's got more background than is necessary. So I do these PowerPoints to kind of save you from reading 35 pages of historical and political background. And I just try to bring it down to the things that affect the literature that we'll be reading. So notes from the textbook. There we go. I have to hit the page numbers there because I have to change the page numbers over to the PDF all the time. These are the pages that encompass this information, and they're very brief, but I think they're the points that are the strongest for the literature that we're studying. The first thing to note is that we're moving on past the Elizabethan era, and that's because Elizabeth died in 1603. There was some question about who should take the throne after her because she did not have any children. She never married and didn't have any children. And so there were different groups that felt like they had a claim to the throne, and it fell eventually to James the First. And so we call that the Jacobean era, but that was an era fraught with rebellion, revolution. Not everybody was happy with him on the throne. And so there was a lot of upheaval in the royalty during the early 17th century. So much so that the king was removed, he was exiled, and a sort of temporary government was put into place. Sometimes we call the 17th century, and we refer to this time period as the Restoration. The Restoration came in 1660, because in 1660, the monarchy was restored to the throne. So there is a period of about 10 years where it was kind of up in the air who was in charge of the country. Luckily, they already had parliament sort of installed then. But there's this skirmish between the royals. And so we call it the Restoration because the monarchy was restored at the end of that time. All right, one of the big concepts that it's important to understand for reading literature of the 17th century is the Enlightenment. Maybe you've studied the Enlightenment when you did world history. We sometimes call this the Age of Reason. But stemming from the Renaissance, which was an age of rebirth, it moves us into a period called the Enlightenment because there are some key inventions that expanded the worldview of people at the time. For example, the telescope was invented in the early 17th century, and this allowed people to understand that the outward world, the big world, is even bigger than we ever expected. You can look up into the sky and you can see some planets with the naked eye. Sometimes they just look like big stars. But with the telescope, scientists had an opportunity to really start to see what's out there, and that hadn't been explored previously. But at the same time, or nearly the same time, people also had to deal with the fact that we were learning more about the microscopic world. The microscope was invented in 1590. So to us, those are pretty standard, tools. We haven't known a time when those things didn't exist, so they seem pretty basic to us. But imagine a life where you didn't know what was out there beyond your village or your country, let alone the world, let alone the universe. And finding out that there's a whole universe would be kind of overwhelming and confusing. And there were theories about the universe, of course, going back to Ptolemy and Copernicus and all of that sort of thing. But we start to see the evolution of the idea of the universe and people dealing with that concept. People also had to deal now with things that they couldn't see, like the microscope. That would be kind of creepy if you didn't know that there's bacteria on you all the time and mites and things that live on your body, and all of a sudden now you know that there are colonies and bacteria that's growing inside your body, et cetera, et cetera. So they didn't understand any of that. That part of the reason that the plague was so well developed. But the little world is also being explored, the internal aspects of the human body, and the details that we can only see like in a drop of blood. I don't know when you do that experiment when you're in 6th grade or something, where you look at your blood under a microscope and you can see cells and things like that. They didn't know anything about that. And so that's brand new. And this whole Enlightenment is an opportunity to kind of start thinking about your place in the world and question the things that you had always taken for granted. And it advances science greatly. I think we can think of that in a lot of ways as an extension of humanism, because if humans have the power to control their own destiny and make their own decisions, as we see in the Renaissance, the next step is, okay, well then let's use this intelligence. Let's create tools to help us view our world and understand what surrounds us and what's out there. And so the Age of Enlightenment is kind of like a natural continuation of that idea, using their intellectual power to start thinking about scientific endeavors. Here's the Ptolemaic universe. I don't know if you're familiar with it, probably you are. But this has to be questioned because of the advent of the telescope. And the idea was that all the planets, including the sun, revolve around the Earth. Ptolemy came up with that idea, but we have to start questioning that in the 17th century because telescopes start to tell us something different. And there's another order to the universe. So how does this play out in literature? New discoveries started to make people rethink their world and their place in it. The bigger the universe gets, the smaller we feel as human beings, the smaller we feel as a civilization. And so poets contemplate that and the philosophical aspects of understanding now that there's a bigger world both out there and inwardly, and there's more to life than we originally thought. So another topic is the great chain of being. You may or may not already know that, but that will come up quite a bit in in Paradise Lost. And it's also a concept that is important to the time period because it demonstrates religious belief and also the hierarchy of living elements. So let me show you the Great Chain of Being. So this is an illustration from a book called Rhetorica Christiana, which is sort of like the overview of Christian beliefs, separate from the Bible, working with the Bible, but like sort of like this is what we hold to be true in this belief system. And the Great Chain of Being is about a hierarchy in the universe. So if we're contemplating this large universe, how is it ordered? What's its structure? And this is what they came up with. It's called this Great Chain of Being. And so God is at the top of it. This isn't the best picture, but I did some close-ups in the next couple of slides that I'll show you. God is up here and in the firmament with the angels surrounding him this way. And then there are some other angels here. You can tell because they're sitting on clouds. And then here comes the people and they're on the earth. After that comes air animals, then sea animals, then land animals, then the trees and plants and minerals and down to that point. I don't think they knew about molecules, but the idea that there's a food chain, that there's a chain of being, not a food chain. We're not eating angels. If you have eaten an angel, you can have an A for the course. I just require a little proof. So here are the segments of that image. And you can see here's God sitting on the throne in heaven. Here's Christ, the crucified Christ at his feet. Probably Virgin Mary over here. And then you can see all the angels that surround that. That's the top level of the chain. And you can even see God here holding the end of the chain, and the chain extends down. Let me go back and you can see. The chain extends through his hand down through all of these creations. I mean, to show his creation and also to show how interrelated everything is in nature. Here is the angels. Here are the humans on Earth. Then you could see the birds, the sea creatures, the land creatures, camels and elephants and all that stuff, beasts of burden, and then the trees. So humans are more intelligent on an upper level compared to birds and so on. That's the Great Chain of Being. And everything's connected through that chain. All right, so moving into the characteristics of literature of the period, what literature was like and how that's different from the Renaissance. Remember that on the midterm, you will need to look at a new poem and say, oh, that's a Renaissance poem, or that's a 17th century poem, or that's a medieval poem, or that's an Anglo-Saxon poem. So I always go through the qualities of the literature of the time period. Mainly I focus on poetry. And so that will be an important element of the exam for you to be able to go back and say, oh, this has the qualities of a Renaissance poem, or what have you. So patronage continues. We saw that in the Renaissance. That is continuing into the 17th century. The idea that an aristocrat would spend money paying for the living expenses of an artist or a writer so that they can create. Because if they don't have somebody paying for them, they have to go get a manual labor job and their art would never happen. Printers are becoming more and more available. The printing press has been out for 200 years at this point. So they're becoming more widely used, and that means that there's more reading material and therefore slightly more literacy. There's more opportunity to read, a wider scope of reading, and so all of that is improving. Acting companies. So when we talk about plays, this is a time in the 17th century where we started to see drama being pulled back. We saw the burgeoning of playwrights like Shakespeare in the Renaissance, but in the 17th century, there are some issues that make it harder and harder for acting companies to survive. One of them is that there are restrictions on printed material, so the actors don't have much that they can even perform, because writers either have to create it themselves or they have to pay money to do a play that somebody else already wrote down, and that's too expensive. So a lot of theaters closed, and whatever theaters were still open toward the middle part of the 17th century were closed with the influx of Puritans who felt that putting oneself on display was not morally correct. And so really play houses, theaters were all closed in the middle part of the 17th century for quite some time. All right, so some things that are going away in the 17th century are long poems like sonnet sequences or pastorals. We always see, like, whatever was prevalent in one time period, the next time period goes in a different direction. It's kind of like fashion, right? Like, you don't want to wear the same stuff as your mom, so, or your dad, so you have your own thing. But sometimes retro comes back, right? People want to wear stuff from the 90s, from the 80s, like skip a generation. So we see things showing up cyclically sometimes, but long poem sequences, pastorals, mythological narratives are out. Elaborate ornamentation is out, and we see less of that in literature. What we see is poetry that is short, witty, uses regular speech, sometimes satirical. We see literature in general that's satirical. We'll be looking at Gulliver's Travels, which is highly satirical, and you could even argue that Paradise Lost has some satire as well. The love elegy, which is, you know, like a farewell or a sad love poem. Metaphysical poetry, which I will describe in a few minutes, but it's about transcending the usual. And religious poetry. Essays are also something that become prevalent during the 17th century. We haven't seen that in previous literary periods. We had it on the schedule to read Pope's essay on man. I had to take it off the schedule. I'm hoping that I can find some way to talk to you about it at least a little bit in one of the lectures before we leave this unit. Because what happened was, as all of this age of enlightenment was going, you know, happening, and people were rethinking their approaches to life and the universe, the writers would sometimes write down their thoughts. It's not a play, it's not a story, it's not a poem. Instead, it's their ideas on a topic. And so essays, not the kind we do in school, but like essays that you would produce and publish in a newspaper, those start to become more prevalent in the 17th century. Here's what I think about the human condition or poverty or whatever topic. All right, so winding down for today, there's two other things I want to do. I want to talk about the 17th century poetry. I'm going to use one poet and three of his poems to demonstrate for you these qualities of 17th century literature. And then I want to prep you a little bit for your reading of the first book of Paradise Lost before we go. So John Donne is a poet from the 17th century, and his work is mainly metaphysical. When we talk about metaphysical poetry, we talk about transcending the usual, and his poetry definitely does that. This is an example, The Flea. And after we're done, I'll read it for you, and then I'll talk about how it meets these qualities over here. So The Flea is a poem. I'll just tell you what it's about, and then I'll read it so that you already know what to expect. But the Flea is a poem about, the speaker is a man who is trying to convince his female companion to have sex. And the way that he's doing it, instead of just being outright, is that he's trying to convince her by saying, look, this flea that's been jumping around on us, I'm not going to get into why there's fleas jumping on them because that's gross. But it wouldn't have been gross to them because bathing was not a thing really back then in this time period. Maybe you had a bath once a year or twice. So fleas are common. We'll just accept that and move on. So he says, hey, look, this flea bit you and then it bit me. So the flea in its little flea body has both of our bloods. We're already intermingled. We might as well continue intermingling. This is his argument for this woman to yield herself to him. And she's not having it. And so he continues to try by saying, we're practically married because when you get married, the two become one, and we're already one in this flea. So why can't we just do it? So that's what the poem is about. I'll read it and hopefully you can see some of that in the poem. It goes like this: mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. Me it sucked first, and now sucks thee. And in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said a sin, or shame, or loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swells with one blood made of two. And this, alas, is more than we would do. Okay, so in that moment, she moves to squish the flea. Like it's her answer. I don't think so. And so he says, "Oh, stay, 3 lives in 1 flea spare, where we almost, nay, more than married are. This flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed and marriage temple is. Though parents grudge and you, we are met and cloistered in these living walls of jet. Though use make you apt to kill me, let not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege 3 sins in killing 3. If you kill that flea, it'll be like killing you and me and the flea. So you can't do that." So then she moves and she crushes it, which is pretty much the answer to his question. "Cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence? Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphst, and say'st that thou find'st not thyself nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true, then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor, when thou yieldest to me, will waste, as this flea's death took life from thee. Someday you will give it up to me, and this will all be, like some silliness that we did." So the flea is, kind of a surprising poem. You wouldn't think that these proper old poets wrote about stuff like trying to get women to have sex with them. But the way that this poem goes about it is what we call metaphysical poetry. It's the idea that there is a conceit being used that is an extended metaphor. The flea is a metaphor for marriage or the combining of 2 people together. And nobody would normally make that comparison. It's a really out there, sort of innovative, complex comparison that's carried through the whole poem. And we call that a conceit. That's the term for that literary effect. So also this poem has regular speech and satire. In some ways it's making fun of marriage. It's also making fun of men who think that they can, find clever ways to get women to be with them. Okay, another example of 17th century poetry is the Valediction Forbidding Mourning, which is a beautiful poem. Same poet, different tone. This is a love elegy. It's about the speaker has to separate from the person that he loves, and he's telling them not to cry, not to worry, not to mourn the temporary absence. A valediction, forbidding mourning, is the title. In case you didn't know, a valediction is a goodbye. At graduation, the valedictory address is a goodbye. And so the valedictorian is the person who is giving the goodbye speech. They get to say goodbye for the class. They have that honor. The salutatorian says hello. So salutatorian and valedictorian don't have anything to do with first place, second place, the origin of those words. It's just that the person who has the highest grade point average is given the honor of giving the goodbye for the class as they're leaving. And the person with the second best average gets the honor of greeting everybody. That's why the salutatory address comes first, because they greet everybody for the class. They do the job of the class by welcoming everybody. And then the valedictory is the goodbye. But anyway, valediction just means goodbye. And then you have forbidding mourning, meaning I forbid you from crying about this. And basically the argument is, and there's a conceit here too, the argument in this poem is, if, when I go, I don't want you to make a big scene. I don't want you to cry. I don't want you to be upset, because we're not separated. We're just expanded. right? And one of the similes he uses in the poem is like gold. If I took a gold nugget and I pounded it out flat so that it was, like a piece of gold, thinly, stretched, then it would still be the same piece of gold. So our relationship has just been stretched, and now there's going to be a distance between the two of us for a period of time. That's not anything to mourn and cry about. We're still connected. We still have a connection in our relationship. And he says, in fact, people who have relationships that can't withstand that are probably not strong relationships. So you don't need to cry because you're not really separated completely. There's still that tie, that there's still that string that binds you together. And it's the people who had to that get so upset about being apart, that can't have to always be touching each other, always have to be in each other's vicinity, always have to know where the other person is. All of that is an insecure love. And he says, you don't have to worry about that because we have a secure love. And so that's the gist of this poem. It goes like this: as virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, whilst some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no, so let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. That's a reference to the spheres of the planets as they circle around the earth or the sun. We don't notice that, and that's how he wants their parting to be. Dull sublunary lovers' love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. So in this one, there's a conceit. I wish that I had a compass. I don't have a compass. I have a hole puncher, which will act as my compass. They're not talking about a compass like north, south, east, west. He's talking about a compass that you would use to make a circle, like in geometry. Do they have those where there's a point and you put it on the paper like this, and then you put the pencil in the other side, and then you can spin it like this and draw a circle, right? The one in the middle has to stay fixed. So that's the conceit. He's comparing their relationship to a compass. She's the fixed foot because she's staying, and he's leaving, so he's the moving foot. But with her firm presence, he can return back again, right? And so he says, if you're firm and strong in our relationship, then I'll end up coming right back to where I started after I get done with whatever it is I have to go do out in the world. Makes me end where I begun. It's a beautiful poem. There's a lot more to it. I could probably spend a whole class period just talking about this poem, but I think you get the idea of the 17th century conceit with this one. All right, the last poem to look at today to show 17th century literature is Holy Sonnet 10. Holy Sonnet 10 is part of a series of sonnets that John Donne wrote. It's religious poetry, which is one of the qualities of 17th century literature. Not all of it is religious, but a lot of it has religious overtones. And it's also short and witty. It's about death. You wouldn't expect death to have a witty quality to it. But what's witty about this poem is that the speaker is kind of promising death that he won't be the end of him. And it's about eternal life. So this is a pretty famous poem. Sometimes it's called Death Be Not Proud. In other words, death, don't get so full of yourself because you can still be conquered. And the conquering is through eternal life and through, religious belief. So it goes like this: Death, Be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So the way that death can be killed is through the belief in eternal life. So it's kind of like a little twist, a witty twist on the idea that death is the end. And so he's kind of putting death down and saying, you have to go wherever, there's war and sickness and fate and desperate men and kings. You have to go to all those places and do their bidding. But I will conquer you. Even when you come to kill me, I will still conquer you because I'll have everlasting life. So it's kind of clever. All right, so hopefully those 3 poems help you kind of understand what I was talking about with the qualities of 17th century literature. All right, the last little part of the PowerPoint here is a little bit of preparation for reading Paradise Lost, which you have book 1 for Thursday. This is John Milton over here. Super nice hair, I gotta say. I have to say that I wish I knew some of his secrets. I hope that's not the only thing you remember about John Milton. So John Milton was born and died, like he lived just during this time period that we've been talking about, the middle part of the 17th century. And his family was cultured, Protestant, upper middle class. He had time to go to school and be educated. He predicted that he would write the great English epic, which he certainly did in Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. There's a sequel to Paradise Lost, in case you didn't know that, Paradise Regained. He was very dedicated to his studies, and this is one of the reasons that I am going to stress that you should read your footnotes when you're reading Paradise Lost. John Milton was very widely read, knew a lot about many different things, science and other pieces of literature and so on. Your footnotes will help you to fill in some of the references that he's making that he doesn't explain. He just expects for people to understand these references. But nowadays, our education is not like that. So the footnotes will fill you in, and you should definitely read them. So he had this very dedicated life to his studies. And he had some hardship in his life, as most writers do in some way or another. He lost his wife and a child, and he also went completely blind in 1645. He wrote Paradise Lost as a blind person. He dictated it to his daughter, and she had to write it all out by longhand. So he had to speak it because he was blind and he couldn't write. So a few things about Paradise Lost. It was published in 1667. So right about the time that we're talking about the end of the Restoration and moving into the Enlightenment. So it's right there in the crux of what we've been talking about throughout this entire presentation. There are a lot of elements of Paradise Lost that John Milton desired to make like ancient works that have stood the test of time, like the Odyssey and the Iliad and all of those really ancient texts. And he does some things to hearken our minds back to those texts. And one of them is he uses in media res, which we talked about when we were studying Oedipus, the idea that we're starting in the middle of things. And we start in the middle of Paradise Lost. At the very beginning of Paradise Lost, it is the moment when all of the fallen angels, okay, so I don't know, not everybody is familiar with these stories, I guess, so I'll tell you. Some of the angels in heaven at some point in biblical history decided that they didn't want to be the servants of God and that there should be a more democratic approach to heaven. So they challenged God, and Lucifer was the main leader in that rebellion. And he challenged God's position as the total authority in heaven. And a bunch of other angels went with him. And so there was a huge battle. And this rebellion ended in the defeat of Lucifer. And he and all of his fellow angels that were rebelling against God were cast out of heaven. Obviously, God doesn't want them around anymore because of their defection. So he throws them out of heaven and they're cast into this sort of chaos. And that's where we will find them at the beginning of Paradise Lost. They have been kicked out of heaven. They've fallen. They're kind of banged up. They don't really know where they are. It's like a nothingness sort of place. And Lucifer and Beelzebub and Belial and some of those other characters will start talking about what we should do. They're immortal, so they can't die, but they have to have an existence. So what do we do? And so that's what we mean by in media res. That all stuff has already all happened, and they're trying to collect themselves and figure out, do we get revenge against God? Do we just try to make a life for ourselves? What do we do? And so that's what I'll be talking about in book 1. Also, we see the invocation of the muse. The muse is kind of like, the inspiration for writing, the gods that or goddesses that will allow the writer to create. And so that happens in a lot of ancient texts, and Milton is channeling those ancient texts. And so he also starts with the invocation of the muse. And you'll see that at the beginning also of book 2. And of course, he uses many epic similes to describe the characters and the setting. And epic simile is an actual literary term. I know nowadays we talk about everything being epic, but an epic simile is just an extended simile that goes on for a while, not just one little comparison. So there's 2 main plots that we think about with Paradise Lost. One we will see in our reading, and the other one comes later and that we won't be reading. So we'll see how Lucifer and Satan and the other angels that have fallen with him are trying to recover from that. And they will decide toward the end of, toward book 2, that they're going to get revenge on God by corrupting his newest creation, which is humans. And so the fall is the fall of the angels out of heaven as God has rejected them, but also the fall of man because Satan will be responsible. Satan is the name that Lucifer takes when he's cast out of heaven. And he will take the form of a snake in the Garden of Eden in order to corrupt God's newest invention. And that is the beginning of their revenge against God and the beginning of sin. And so sin is their big revenge. And that the remainder of Paradise Lost goes more into that, but we're not going to be reading that. We talked about that. So just as a reminder, do make sure that you read your footnotes. They're super important. And the last thing is, I know I'm running out of time. So the last thing is the main characters. You know how to pronounce all of these except this name right here is Belial. And this one down here is Beelzebub and Mammon. The rest of them I think you probably know how to say, but when you're reading it, you can do the correct pronunciation that way. I was just remembering last period that there's a really good audio version of the parts that we read. I remember last year I found it for the students and they found it really helpful to follow, like listen to it. It's on YouTube somewhere. I'll post it. And that way, if it helps you when you're reading to listen to characters talking, and it's super dramatic. So it kind of helps with the reading, keep you focused on what's happening in the text. I'll provide that for you. I didn't think about it until second period today when I was going through the characters, but I'll make that available to you if I can find out that it's still available on YouTube. Any questions? That's pretty much the end of the presentation. You will see that before the story starts, there's going to be something called the argument in your text. It's not really an argument, it's just setting the topic for the piece. Sort of like the thesis. you have any questions, you can put them in the chat over there. But do read Paradise Lost. I did create a study guide. It's a little bit different than the study guides that we did for Othello. In this one, I put kind of a summary in the middle for you of all the things that are happening in the text, and a space for you to write in. If you want to make a copy of this, you can, or you can just use the summary to help you read. Over here, the page and lines in the textbook where those are referred to, and then over here, what are the key events and words that are happening to kind of keep you on track. So if you think that would be helpful, that would be a good thing probably for you to work on alongside your reading of book 1. All right, well, I'll stay on for a few minutes in case anybody has any questions. If you are having trouble getting into your portal and you need me to reset your password, you can stick around and I'll jot down your information so that I can do that for you. Otherwise, I will see you on Thursday. Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Bye, Miss.
Bye, Miss.
Have a good day.